said she was gonna be late, so there still should be a couple people that, should be coming.
Who was that? Who was excused, Dan? Oh, I
Alder
found it.
Alder Martinez Rutherford, Robbie, Weber, and Jose Barros. And Denise is gonna be late. So we should see Kaylee, Alder Harrington McKinney, Darajan, and Alder February 19th, 2025 meeting of the Transportation Commission to order. Ariana, if you could read the instructions, please.
All right. Welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are unable, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak. The name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ariana. Aiden, if you could call the roll, please.
Sure. So MGR Govindarajan, Dean Anita Martinez Rutherford, Barbara Harrington McKinney, Robbie Weber, and Pepe Barros are all excused. Juliana Bennett, who I don't see at the moment. Ann Kovich.
Here.
Denise Jess will be joining later. Chris McCahill.
Here.
Bill Bremer.
Here.
Harold Kleems.
Here.
Kaylee Jamison.
Here.
And Lynn Olson.
Here.
Okay. Thanks to everybody who was able to join. We'll have to work on making sure people understand the importance of letting us know if they can't come. So Kaylee and Lynn, you both can make motions and vote this evening because clearly we have a lot of people who are missing. So both alternates are able to take action. And of course, you're always able to participate in discussion, whether you can make motions or vote. Did everybody have a chance to look at the minutes from the February 5th meeting? Bill?
I'll make a motion for approval of the minutes
There's a motion?
as written.
Thank you. Harold?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. Okay, seeing no hands, the motion is carried unanimously. We did have an email under item 1. Did we have anybody registered to speak under item 1, Aiden?
We have one person registered as available for questions, John Elliott of South Midvale Boulevard. But I think they sent an email. They were just wondering if Midvale was going to be on the agenda.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you could have Tom Moore email him and let him know when that's expected to come on the agenda.
Will do.
Okay, thank you. Any disclosures or recusals this evening? Okay, seeing no hands. Okay, we have 4 items proposed for the consent agenda. Do we have anybody registered to speak on any of the items?
No, we do not.
Okay. Does anybody wish to have any of the items separated from the consent agenda? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So we have item 2, Legislature 87013 regarding an agreement with the Village of Cottage Grove related to operating and maintenance of traffic control signals. Item 86997, which is item 3, Legislature 86997, approving roadway geometry for the Mineral Point Road and High Point Road, which we have seen at TC once before. Item 4, Legislature 86856, authorizing the mayor and city clerk to enter into a contract with Graph USA to provide consulting engineering services for the parking division. And item 5, Legistar 86999, authorizing an intergovernmental agreement, two intergovernmental agreements with UW-Madison to address removal of certain on-street parking on Monroe Street and North Brook Streets. Do we have a motion on the consent agenda? Phil? Can't hear you, Bill.
Sorry, I'd like to take the one on parking on Monroe Street and I have a few questions about that, so take it off.
Okay, so you would like to separate item 5 from the consent agenda?
Yes,
Okay. All right, do we have a motion on items 2 through 4? Phil?
I'll make a motion for approval of items 2 through 4.
Okay, is there a second? Chris?
Yeah, second.
Okay. Typically not any discussion on consent agenda items, so I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. So please raise your hand. Okay, so items 2 through 4 are passed on the consent agenda, so let's look at item 5. And who's here to be able to answer Bill's questions on item 5? Why don't you go ahead, Bill, and ask your questions, and we'll see who's here and
Maybe-
able to answer.
Perhaps Tom can answer.
Mhm.
I found it very interesting. The price that the city calculates for a parking meter spot is the value that was in that agreement is $44,000, and that's I guess I didn't appreciate what the revenue that those parking spots generate. And I guess, Tom, if it is in the agreement, I didn't see it. Perhaps it is, but how long is that parking removed? How long will that?
It's in perpetuity.
Okay.
It's to my knowledge. Stephanie's not here. I've been briefed on the situation.
Okay.
I think they're they're making some facility changes that require that those spaces be available for truck turning movement.
I see. Okay.
And so they,
It had something about truck turning, and I didn't quite
yeah,
understand if that's going to be a very wide driveway then, or
I guess, I was briefed on this 3 months ago, and I saw some truck turning movements, and
okay.
they wanted to, Stephanie had to make a payment or, develop a cost. So I pointed her towards a formula,
Okay.
engineering economics, right?
Yeah,
Present worth of an
okay. So
annualized.
it's present worth of that parking. So it's perpetuity. So it's gone. That will never have parking on it then.
Mhm.
So, okay. I didn't know if it was for the life of the construction or just what it was, but okay. All right. Okay.
I think the project demand requires that it be removed, doesn't it, Tom?
Yeah. And I had no problem with that.
Yeah, I think they're making, a facility. Again, Stephanie has
Right.
more background, but I think they're making
Yeah.
a pretty substantial facility change.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and in two places, my understanding, yeah.
Yeah.
Eric, did you have something to add?
I'm not sure that the agreement was drafted by ACA Doran Visti, and I was involved with the meeting with Stephanie Cox and Doran. Somebody said that it might be forever and that parking would never come back. That may be the case, or it may be that UW does reinstate parking at some point. But I think they needed to, long term for loading beyond the construction of the project.
Okay.
So I would say it's indefinite, not necessarily permanent.
Okay. All right. Okay. I have no problem with that as far as it's been worked out and studied. So I have complete confidence in the people that did the study. So, but I thought it was an interesting cost. Was $44,000 per spot. Wow. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, based on my reading of the fiscal note, it is $44,000 total across the 8 spots.
Oh,
That was my reading,
okay.
which comes out, the fiscal note says it's based on average revenue over 20 years, even though it is in perpetuity. And so if you do the backward math, like 44,000 divided by 8 years, divided by 20,
That's
divided by 8 spot by 20 years, you get $240 a year or something like that. At least that's how I read the fiscal note on this item.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Carl.
Perhaps that's what the fiscal note says. The agreement that I'm reviewing right now actually says 44,000 per space.
Yep, that was why I raised my hand, was just that
Yeah.
that is correct. It's 40,000 per space, 44 per space.
Yeah. Yang, did you have a comment?
Same here. Yeah. I think that's the first space. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, that was my reading as well. Yeah. Okay, other comments or questions? We would need a motion to approve this item. Bill,
Make a motion for approval. Is that item number 5?
okay, there's a motion. Harold?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to vote no or abstain. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, the motion is carried. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll go on to item number 6, Transportation Improvement Program updates to the scoring tool. Chris, are you going to do that? Jose going to do it? Are you doing it together, or how's that going to work?
I can just introduce it a little bit. So many of you have been on the TC for a while, are familiar with kind of our tip presentation. This year we are splitting it into 2 presentations because it can get a little lengthy. And the first part we're focusing on is our tool that we use to help select programs and the updates that we've done to that tool this year. So that's what Jose is going to be talking about. And then I anticipate at the next meeting, I'm hoping, or the latest, the meeting after that, sometime in March, we would be coming back with the proposed projects and the actual proposed transportation improvement program as part of that. So I'll unless Tom wanted to add something, I'll let Jose start presenting.
I'm going to add that Jose's going to do a great job.
Okay, take it away, Jose.
All right. Okay. Let's see here. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Hi there. Jose Navarro. I'm an engineer with the Department of Transportation for the City of Madison. And so today I'm just kind of here to present the Transportation Improvement Program Screening and Project Development Tool. I'll just shorthand it to call it the TIP Scoring Tool. And so we are on the kind of the 2025 iteration of this tool. And so previously we kind of introduced it in 2022. And then from there, we kind of done iterations every year. And so explaining what this tool is used for, Chris kind of had mentioned that's kind of helps select projects ahead, but typically the City of Madison will do a capital budget every year. And then in that capital budget, we'll do a capital improvement plan. And then within that, there's kind of a reconstruction streets pot of money. And so from there, we kind of need to determine, okay, well, what streets do we need to improve, reconstruct, or resurface? And we kind of do like a 5-year outlook on that. And so what this tool does is to kind of pinpoint what street segments need the most work. And so what is the TIP scoring tool? It is pretty much a GIS data sets to help do data-driven decisions. And so you can see here that there's kind of a scoring to it. So like it's out of 60 points. And so when you go out to the streets, you look at a road and you see, okay, well, this street kind of has like some few potholes, maybe it has a little bit of cracking. But what this TIP scoring tool does is that it looks beyond just that. It looks at kind of what's the condition of the underground utilities, such as water, storm, sanitary. It also looks at like how to like the pedestrian needs, like is there a sidewalk there? Is there no sidewalks there? And also along with like bicyclists, so like how they feel on the road. And then we also take into account of like transit, so bus routes, is this road segment located on a bus route? And then there are some kind of additional factors to that. So we'll have our 60 points of like core score. And then on top of that, we'll do a bonus scoring where we'll look at traffic safety. Is that road segments within like a kind of like crash corridor area where we have traffic safety concerns? So if it is, we'll give it like a 5% bonus points to it. And then we also will do like equity priority areas, like areas where we can better serve underrepresented communities. And so we'll add an additional 15%. And then from there, we kind of like jumble it all in. We place it on a map, and then it'll kind of show what is going on, like what areas need to be worked on to help evaluate like, okay, 2025, we should do these projects. So this is actually a little bit different from just Safe Streets. I just want to throw that in there. Safe Streets is kind of more smaller scale projects. And then it goes through a whole different kind of process. So this isn't reflecting off of Safe Streets. It's kind of more big picture, big projects kind of thing. And so here's kind of like an example of the scoring itself. Here you can see like a small snippet of the map. I'll have like an actual slideshow showing off the map, the legend and everything. But the most important part here is that you can see kind of like an Excel format showing off the scores. So, and that bottom portion, you can see like the water score, the sanitary score for each segment. And you can kind of see there's something called a pre-score, which is kind of that core area. So it's like 60 points. So from adding all those together to get some kind of pre-score, we'll then tack on the bonus points. And then from there, we'll add it all together to get an adjusted score to kind of pop up on the map that you can see there. So like you'll see some of the segments are popping out as different colors. And let me just state that this is a lot of data that goes into it because this is a multi-department effort. Like this is a lot of data. If I go back to what I was talking about, it's like how we scored it. We talk about pavements. So every year, engineering goes out twice to evaluate the road conditions. So from there, they'll enter it into their GIS system, and then we'll take it and put it all together to get the road conditions. Sanitary will then do their sanitary mains and give them a rating. And that's determined by like televising and what software they have and other factors. Stormwater, there are ongoing watershed studies. So as I said before, this is like the 2025 iteration. Well, as they're doing their studies, this data set will just improve over time. And so the water department will then look at, how often or like what's the likelihood of a water main breaking in this area. And so they look at a whole analysis of how like water main breaks occur. And then they kind of just jumble it up to create their data sets. And then for the pedestrian and bike, we work with traffic engineering and the MPO to kind of get their opinions and like, okay, well, how do we score this? And then we also use their data sets to determine like the criteria and just like how many points a certain road segment should get. And then transit. So since we're looking at bus routes, we work with Metro. And then the high injury network, we actually work with UW-Madison. And so they actually do kind of the crash analysis to determine the high entry network for this to kind of show off where there is like traffic safety concerns. And then the equity priority area is the finance department. And so it's a lot of data come from all over the place. And I'll break down kind of what each of the kind of criterias are. So to start that off, I'll do pavement. The pavement's out of 30 points, and it's a combination of what the road condition is like, along with the road classification. And so pretty much to boil that down, it's like saying a local road in poor condition should not have as much priority over a arterial in poor condition. And so there's a long list of criteria that I won't show off here, but I will show off this map kind of showing the pavement condition. And so you can kind of see like why we should be using this tool, because there is poor pavement condition all over the place in Madison. And it's kind of hard to determine which areas we should focus on. And so this is just a piece of the puzzle. And so for sanitary, the way they rated their sanitary mains is kind of a 1 through 5 kind of system, but it's backwards. So like a sanitary main that had a condition rating of 1 is in poor condition, so it got 10 points. If it was a 5, it was kind of brand new, it got 0 points. And so the map of that looks like this. Same thing, it's kind of all over the place. And so, like I said, this tool helps determine like where we should prioritize. Storm is kind of a different case. So it's out of 10 points, but you'll see in this map I'll show off is that it's a work in progress. So in 2018, there was major flooding in Madison that kind of prompted these watershed studies to occur. And so from these studies, a stormwater pipe layer was introduced. And so if a road segment was near one of those improvements, it got 10 points. But you will notice that it's only on the west side. So when the flooding had occurred, it mainly affected the west side. So that's where the watershed studies had started. So over time, like this will kind of expand out towards the east as those studies are being done. And so, like I said before, this is just the 2025 iteration, and next year, we'll keep building onto it. And so the water is a little bit more simpler, where they kind of determine a water main has like a risk to it. If it's low risk, it was 0 points. If it was a high risk, it got the 10 points. And so you put this all into a map and you kind of just get this here, where green is good and red is bad. But as you can see, again, all over the place. And then if we move on to pedestrian needs, it's out of 8 points, but it's kind of the more complicated ones for the criteria. And on our 2025 iteration, we have changed the way it was scored, the criteria, because we had found out that one of the MPO's data set was outdated. So what you see here with the 0, 3, and 5 and 8 points is kind of what we use for this year, using newly updated data sets. And so you can see that 0 points was awarded for the pedestrian needs if it had sidewalks on both sides of the streets. 3 points for sidewalks on one side, and then 5 points for any of the sidewalk gaps, or if there was an area, even though it had sidewalk, there was curb cuts. There was ramps with no curb cuts, so like it was not ADA accessible. So like this is using new data from the ADA transition plan, kind of incorporating into our scoring tool. So now we have a more broader data sets and kind of combine the two to get a a better result. And then the 8 points kind of capitalized on the 5 pointers, where if they were near schools, parks, or bus routes, we should probably prioritize those more. And we're continuously working with like the T and engineering staff to like kind of improve this system. And then this is what the map looks like. There's definitely a lot of red using this system, but that's just what it kind of, the scoring system kind of shot out. And then also these PDFs will be available online, and I'm also working on a memo, or we're also working on a memo on it. But moving on to the bikes, this is also out of the it's first 6 points, but it's like the most complicated one. We worked with TE staff to kind of refine what the criteria should be. And so the shorthand version of it is that we are using the MPO's data sets where we look at the level of stress network. So how do bicyclists feel on the road? We also look at the road classification, you know, how do they feel on this road if it's a local versus a collector? And then we also look at on-street facilities. So say, you know, is there a bike lane there? Is there a protected bike lane there? What is there on the street for those bicyclists to use? And so from those three things, we've kind of got this 0 to 6 scoring system where, you know, it's pretty complicated, but the shorthand version is that we're looking at stress levels, classifications, and then what's on the road itself. So 0 points, we're saying that anything that is the local streets or other local streets than what the 1 pointer has that are low stress, and if they're a low stress collector or in a low stress arterial, they'll also get 0 points. But for the 1 pointer, we look at low stress local roads such as Mifflin Street, Main Street, and also kind of the Lake Loop areas. And then we kind of work our way up the list of like collectors and then arterials all the way to like 6 points, where we'll look at high stress arterials with no facilities on them. And then as we were doing this, we kind of figured out like, okay, well, it doesn't make sense for like a road segment to get certain number of points if there's an off-street path nearby, because a bicyclist will just use the path, and that's where they'll be at. I see a hand up.
Yeah, let me just ask Aiden, I assume we don't have anybody registered to speak on this?
Correct, we do not.
Okay, so we can go ahead and take questions as we go, if you're okay with that, Jose and Chris?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Kaylee.
I'm just wondering, when you said if the off-street path is nearby, it gets 0 points. Like, what is the distance by which we call it nearby?
Yes, so that was kind of a case-by-case basis as we were going through it. So like John Nolan Drive is a good example. You know, the path is nearby. You can see that they would use it to go along that road. That was kind of the determining factor. But if it was like 2 or 3 blocks away, I just wouldn't, or we just wouldn't give it those points.
Okay, thanks. That answers my question.
Thanks, Kaylee. Go ahead, Jose.
Okay. And so this is what we kind of got for the bicyclist scoring map for 2025. You can see there, you know, John Allen Drive is 0 points. And then the newly made Atwood Avenue, you know, also has 0 points, and along with the Mineral Point Road, which just was part of the East-West BRT, there's now a path there, so that also got 0 points as well. And like I said, this is just the 2025 iteration, so we'll just kind of keep improving on how we do things. Transit is a lot more simpler, but it is also out of 6 points, and it's pretty much just if it's 60 feet within a bus route, it got the 6 points. If it wasn't, it just didn't get any points at all. But the difference for this year is that we now include school routes 60 to 64. And you're probably wondering why 60 feet for a buffer is because as we are kind of doing the scoring, we were playing with that buffer and determining like, okay, well, if we do 30 feet, it won't capture the road segments that we think should get those points. If we went to 90 feet, it might capture too many road segments. So 60 feet was kind of that balance that we determined was a good choice to make. And so I just here have a map of the transit network. And then we'll move on to kind of the additional bonus points. And so the high energy network, if road segments were within 60 feet of that, so again, kind of that balance of capturing which road segments should be given the points, we give those a bonus points of 5%. And you'll notice in the next slide, the map has a 2022 version of that. Well, that's because later this year, we will have a newer version. So next year's iteration will have that updated data set. Besides that, we also deal with the equity areas where we'll give them 15%. But for this case, we are actually using a 10-foot buffer because of the way the polygons were drawn. And that's just dealing with that balance again. And it's also a beta layer. So it'll improve over time. So here's the high entry network map, just kind of detailing, where are the areas that are there's a lot of traffic safety concerns here. So anything that fell within those areas within 60 feet, we're given a 5% bonus points. And then the equity priority map, like I said, this is just kind of like a beta layer. So next year it'll probably look a little bit different. But this is the kind of the areas finance has determined should be a priority. And then so you piece all this together, you throw all the maps together, you throw all the data together, and then you finally end up with the tip scoring map. So you can see how all the other maps had a whole bunch of things all sparsed out. Well, this allows you to kind of see areas of you can focus on. So here we can see the ranges go from green to purple. If it's in the purple reddish range, that's kind of the higher priority roads that we should focus on devoting some of that reconstruction money to. And so we'll use that as pretty much kind of a basis or a suggestion to what we should use for the ongoing capital budget usage. And then that's all I got. Any questions, comments, or suggestions?
Questions or comments for either Jose or Chris? Harold.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through this. Some of it sounds familiar, but yeah, it's good to see it again and the changes to it. With regard to the bike and pedestrian network, I know the city is working on creating that all ages and abilities bike network and updating the pedestrian plan. Do you think that that's something, once that's done, could be used to inform the scoring in here?
Yes. As that is being made, we will reach out to TE and kind of reevaluate how we do things with the scoring.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I noticed, I think the bike one seems pretty robust, but we'll see what a new plan will help us with. With the pedestrian one, just, glancing at it, I see some things. There's some stuff on there. I think John Nolan Drive, for example, is, yes, it doesn't have sidewalks, but that's fine. As you said with the bikes, it doesn't need one. Or I think Edgewood Drive is on there, which also Edgewood Drive is a 1-lane, 10-mile-an-hour road, probably doesn't need sidewalks. So yeah, I think that's something that can be improved still and will be nice to have aligned with the other efforts. And then the other question, I hate that we are in an environment where I have to ask this, but I mean, some of these reconstruction projects might be aiming to access federal money, and taking into account equity scores, we should absolutely do. I do wonder, though, if that is going to cause problems at some point in the future.
I'll probably lean on Tom and Chris on that one.
Yeah. This is mostly used for our city tip, and it's mostly city funds. But we do get occasionally some SCBG funds, like for John Nolan Drive. And those kind of go through a separate scoring process with the MPO, whether or not we get that federal funding. The current administration is trying to put in all sorts of different types of restrictions on, this is the money right here, but we want you to change things over here if you want this money over here. And I think we just don't know yet. Yeah.
That makes sense. And yeah, we should absolutely keep doing it as much as we can. Right. I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. Bill, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Ann. Jose, I appreciate the discussion on the pedestrians, the points with sidewalks that at intersections that do not have curb cuts. And I think this is a good example of the transition plan of integrating the data sets and serving multiple purposes. And I think it's a great asset to do both, or use that data in multiple ways. And I think it's a good illustration that it works well together. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate that, it serves the purpose of our transition plan as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Other comments or questions? Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Jose. Just curious, since this combines like sort of traditional asset management with other factors, bike, ped, transit stuff, how does this handle a case where there's just like a piece of failing infrastructure that's getting to be pretty bad and it's not scoring high on anything else, but clearly it's, yeah.
And Chris can weigh in too. In the full process, Jose has kind of showed you 70% of the process, but in the whole process, engineering has they can bump something to the top if they have to. And Chris, you might be able to describe that more.
Yeah, so we have a couple of ways. There is a way to just give it a project like some bonus points if we wanted to in the system, but really what we've been doing is in cases like that is just kind of calling that out in the budget process. So for instance, next week or 2 weeks, Virginia Terrace has 3 failing sanitary sewer dig jobs in the last year and 2 more scheduled. So that is going to be at the top of my list. And, I don't really need a tip scoring tool to tell you all how important that is. So, so we'll just kind of, there's also situations where we've made like an agreement with a developer on a project. Like for instance, we had to do some sanitary sewer for the Lake Street State Street campus garage. And stuff like that. When we've made commitments, we've got to do them as part of that. So we could either, try to put those in the database or just kind of call them out uniquely as they come up when we're doing the budget process is kind of how we're handling it.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, great presentation, Jose and Chris. We'll look forward to hearing more about it. I think this has really been refined and it seems to help us better focus on how to gauge the priorities. And I think that was the purpose of what we were trying to accomplish. So other comments or questions? Okay, thanks so much.
All right, sweet. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Tom, Transportation Division presentation on the history and future of Madison transportation.
Yeah, so this is one of my fun presentations. I've given it a
Yeah.
couple times. And I will have to do this. I have 70 slides to show, and I'm determined not to take more than a half hour of your time. So I'm going to go quick.
Be moving fast, huh?
I will. Let me just make sure that everything kind of works. So I'm seeing the full screen. Are you seeing the full screen?
Yes.
Okay. First, a thank you. Actually, you know what? If you don't mind, if I set my clock, it will help me and it will help you. Everyone wins. There we go. First, a thank you to my sources. A lot of the Wisconsin Historical Society, Molinoff did a history of Madison in the formative years. Stu Leviton had 2 books, really useful. Johnson, and then my former employer, Penn Associates, had some pictures that were very interesting. So first, we tend to think of Madison as we've been here, but people have been here for thousands of years. And maybe we should just pause and remember that people have been here for thousands of years, right? And in Molinoff's book, he was able to trace some of the early indigenous people's paths. What's kind of interesting about this is that if you superimpose our road network on it, you can see that many of these indigenous paths were, the Park Street Fish Hatchery. They serve as the basis for many of our current roads. If we think about more recent history, post-settlement history, this is Madison's first plat in 1836. When this was developed, Madison had a population of 170 people. So this was bold, ambitious thinking. This plat was part of the reason that the Madison was designated as the state capital. But to be a capital, you need people, and to get people, you need a railroad. So on the left, you can see our first rail line was the Prairie du Chien. It's in 1854. But you notice that we were supposed to have a second railroad that was to connect to Madison. That's there by Sun Prairie. The problem was that second railroad, the Milwaukee Road, actually offered cheaper freight rates than the railroad serving Madison. Consequently, a lot of the farmers and others were using the Sun Prairie, the Milwaukee Road from Sun Prairie, as a way to get their shipments there, and Sun Prairie was a boomtown. This was a problem for Madison because Madison, wanted to grow and capture those people and those businesses. So Simeon Mills was determined to find a way to get another railroad here from Beloit. He originally proposed getting a railroad and aligned it down Johnson Street. However, a former mayor, Levi Vilas, lived on Johnson Street, and he thought that was a very terrible idea. So instead, Madison formed a committee. They reviewed different locations, and they decided that this rail line should go on the north side of Lake Mendota. So the Watertown to Sun Prairie was finally completed in 1869, the Baraboo line in 1871. Finally, 30 years later, Madison had 9 lines. And by the turn of the century, we had 148 trains per day. So imagine the disruption that caused, on our city streets. People use trains to get from city to city, but inside the city, horses was the predominant mode of transportation. This is a picture of a market on Blount Street, the Livingston between Dayton and Mifflin Streets. You can just see the horses and the carts. This is a picture of East Washington Avenue, right around 1914. Largely horses, local transportation. I'm going to take a small diversion to another formative event that really shaped Madison's city. Was the Parks and Pleasure Drive Association. It was formed in 1892. Olin, of which Olin Park we have, was one of the founders. This association was kind of instrumental in developing Lake Mendota Drive, Sherman Avenue, that Tinney Bridge, Monona Drive. However, the Parks and Pleasure Drive routes weren't so much used for transportation. They were actually used more as recreation. So you would go out on these roads on the weekends to get away from the city. Similarly, cycling was that way. There was an early cycling club in 1880, but the Madison Cycling Club, which used these new bicycles that didn't have a big wheel in the front, was formed in 1891. This is very popular. In fact, Madison was home to 5 different bicycle manufacturers. But again, it was mostly used for recreation by people who could afford a bike. It didn't really become transportation until the turn of the century, where workmen realized, well, this is a way they could avoid a transit trip. And speaking of transit, our first transit was a mule-drawn bus, and it was instituted in 1884. Basically, at the base of Capitol Hill there on Williamson Street, there was a barn of 50 different mules. And so those mules would support this trolley that went up King Street and around the square. Going up the hill, they needed 3 mules. So the mule driver would hitch it down, go up the hill, and then unhitch it. And then the mule would have to wander back down to help the next trolley as it went up. It ran for about 8 years. Lost 4 cents on every passenger. They charged 5 cents, and it actually cost them 9 cents. Madison needed actually something better. Many of the cities in the state and around the Midwest were getting these electric trolleys. So within 8 years later, the city council gave authority to construct a trolley. They were able to build the first line within 1 year. It ran from 1892 to 1993. These things were wicked fast. They could go up to 30 miles an hour. So just imagine, being on a trolley drawn by a mule versus being on an electric trolley that could go 30 miles an hour. Notice how the wheels are in the middle. That made them very tippy. And so college students, would load onto these things, get on the front or the back, and try and knock them off their tracks by rocking them. Some things don't change, right? This is a map that shows the Madison trolley lines in Madison area. Think about how much development this opened up. It opened up thousands of acres where people could build homes. You didn't have to live close to your work right by the square, but you could actually live, 2 miles apart and take the trolley. Now, by the turn of the century, these trolleys had about 3,000 riders per day. Now, if you wanted to live beyond where the trolley served, you could use a bus. In fact, many developers, like in Monona, Maple Bluff, and Cholla Hills, they would parcel out developments there, and then they would sponsor their own bus using this new combustion engine. The fare on these new buses was 10 cents rather than the 5 cents from the trolley, but it really allowed you to live a little bit farther out and open up even more acreage. Madison's first car was in 1901, but things really began to change with the Model T introduction in 1908. By 1916, this is just 8 years after the Model T was introduced, autos outnumbered horses in the city of Madison. Now, this is a picture of one-way traffic in 1925 around the square. This is Bob LaFollette's funeral. Just look at how many cars are. They had to introduce one-way traffic around the square in 1921 because of the traffic posed by these automobiles. This is State Street in 1928, just 20 years after the introduction of the Model T. And then finally, the trolley company changed and switched to buses in 1934 and 35. Now, this is kind of an interesting picture because it's a bus, but if you look on the side, you can see Madison Railways Company. We actually still have one of these older buses on one of our warehouses up of Livingston, or the Ingersoll. Buses became very critical, kind transportation infrastructure. This is a picture from, I think, 1953. If you look at how many buses there are. I put a little yellow dot amongst all of them. People needed the bus to get to work, to get around. But around this time, other forces started to change things. And one of the driving forces was actually Frank Lloyd Wright. He came up with this concept of Broadacre City. Broadacre City was actually kind of a misnomer because it was really more about living in the suburbs. Like, why do you need to live in the city if you have these forms of transportation that can take you to the city, and then you can kind of live away from the city? William Levitt is considered the father of the modern suburb. He developed tract houses. He could kind of build a house in 27 distinct steps and build them cheaply and quickly. I think 32 homes a day he could produce. And he could sell these for under $8,000 per home. So if you were to escalate that in today's dollars, that's under $100,000 per home. So it just kind of illustrates how economic these homes were. You also had the National Housing Act of 1934, which allow you to have a 30-year mortgage instead of a 10-year mortgage. Think about how that changes, the number of people who can afford making a mortgage payment. And then you have the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which built all these highways and streets. So you kind of put these all together, and you really have this enabling of suburban, less dense housing. You have the inexpensive housing, you have home loans that people can afford, and then you have a freeway that can take you to work. This is Levittown, New York. There's also a Levittown in New Jersey. There's several other places. That also happened in Madison to a certain extent. To the left, you see our traditional development pattern. This is right around the Regent Street area. And to the right, you kind of see a more suburban development pattern. This is in the southwest portion of our city. The one on the left near Regent Street has 54 dwelling units per acre. The one on the right has 6 dwelling units per acre. So the one on the left is, I think, 9 times more dense than the one on the right. So if we look at this as far as a development pattern in Dane County, the blue represents the population of the city of Madison, and then the orange represents the population of all the entities within Dane County that are not the city of Madison. So you can see from really the 1880s to 1970, there's really a transition where people from the rural areas wanted to come to the city because the city had the trolleys and the employment and the shows and the restaurants, right? But basically from the 1970s until 2010, we had really more of a flight to the suburbs. Why would you want to live in the city? Why not live in the suburb where you can have a bigger yard and all these different things, right? More recently, we've seen that our suburbs and our city are growing at a similar pace. We're seeing a lot of development, both in our partner communities like Pittsburgh and Sun Prairie, but also in the city of Madison. This is a city of Madison annexation by decade. The lighter colors are the ones that have been annexed more recently. Note, though, that as you are on the periphery of the city of Madison, it's more difficult to get to employment centers without a car. In fact, it's just become more and more reliant on the car to get to places, to get to shopping. So if we look at our pictures, it's kind of a catch-22 situation for a bus if you were providing bus service. The left on the traditional is very transit friendly. There's 54 dwelling units per acre. We can go, several blocks and fill up a bus. Whereas on the right, it's only 6 dwelling units per acre, and we can go several blocks and maybe catch a couple of riders. Residents on the right that live on the periphery say, well, I would take the bus if it came more frequently or if it came by my house, but it's just difficult to serve because there's so many fewer riders per mile driven. During this time where we were leaning into the automobile, We did things like the John Nolan Causeway. I mean, you think about that. We built a road flat out through the middle of a lake. You know, who does that anymore, right? This is the master plan of highways, passed by the City Plan Commission in 1955. George Forster was the chair of the Planning Commission. Here you can see Johnson Street is planned as a freeway, University is planned as a freeway, as is Broome as a freeway. This is the Madison Beltline as is being constructed. It was approved by the State Highway Commission in 1948 and it was built in the early 1950s. This is the interstate connection of the Beltline with the interstate. This is kind of the peak of modernity and transportation. Well, as everyone's getting cars, you have to have a place to put those cars, right? And our downtown was built prior to there being cars, and so we had to find ways to put all these cars. This is called pigeonhole parking. This is for the Manchester department store, which I think was on the north side of the square. This is the Law Park parking lot in 1958. Think about this is the best way to use lakefront property. If you go to Stu Leviton's books or you talk to him, he'll say that the 1960s was all about parking. How could we build more parking? And we actually built 4 parking ramps in the 1950s. This is the Doty Street ramp. And when I came to my job 7 years ago, this was in one of the files. It was a postcard saying it's easy to shop in Madison. Here's your guide to over 10,000 parking spaces in Madison. I suspect it's probably from the 1970s. But businesses needed to advertise this fact so that people would come downtown and go shop. This is what State Street looked like as a result of our leaning into the automobile in 1969. In the lower right, if you see that person riding a bike, he's breaking the law because all bikes were outlawed on State Street and around the Capitol in 1965 by the Madison City Council. Can you imagine, right? As we leaned into the automobile, we lost some other things too. We lost the Chicago Northwestern passenger rail service. The last run from Chicago from the Blair Street station was in 1965, and from the Johnson Street station was in 1971. Why would you use a railroad to get to Chicago if you can get in a car and drive them, right? Buses also have a problem. We really needed the buses to get people to work and to services, but the loss of ridership and a strike and all these different factors put them in financial difficulty. So the city council basically approved the purchase of the bus company by the city because it was such an essential service in 1968. So if you look broadly at our transportation history, basically from the 1860s to 1935, we had relatively compact development patterns. We relied on mass transit. After 1935 to now, basically, we've had more non-compact development and we've relied more on the car. I might actually put a caveat in saying that perhaps the last 5 years, we may have turned a little bit more towards density, and we are approving more dense growth in our corridors. This had a series of unintended consequences on cost, climate, and life. I don't know if we all understood it back in the 1960s when we were making these decisions. An example is cost for parking. We have to store our vehicles, right? And right now we kind of view car storage as a right. We need a place to put them, and many of us have. Even if we use transit, many of us own cars. But that storage comes with a cost, right? Now, this is an example of the Lake Street garage. What's on the left is kind of our monthly costs if you amortize the construction costs of that building and our operations costs. And then you can see what our revenue cost is on the right. So depending on how you look at it, and there's different ways to look at it, we are providing a $325 to $500 a month subsidy for people to park their cars. And I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing, but I think oftentimes we think of it as a right. I have a right to park my my vehicle. And it's not, it's just, we try and provide for all of our transportation modes. And in this particular instance, there were other factors, right? This garage supports the businesses on State Street, supports the UW. It's a really important garage for that portion of city. Street costs too. To the left is a street, Rutledge Street. It's close to my home. It was built in 1913. It's 28 feet wide. To the right is a street that was built in 2014, according to our subdivisions ordinances. It's 48 feet wide, 20 feet bigger. So our street costs are more than 50 to 70% larger. Our costs are to accommodate, in many ways, parsonage, right? If you look at vehicle miles traveled by you can see that the blue line is our vehicle miles traveled. The orange line is our population. Our population has increased 60% since the 1970s, but our vehicle miles traveled annually has increased 190%. People are driving almost double what they did in the 1970s. So I got my driver's license in the 1970s, right? And so basically everything's like double what it was back when I got my license. That has costs as far as our climate. The blue line represents the atmospheric carbon, whereas the gray line represents the carbon introduced into the climate from emissions, man-made emissions. And then I just went ahead and superimposed our global temperature. And so some people feel like, well, they're not linked, but it does seem like there's a correlation, right? The picture on the left is an example from the LA fires just this month. Picture on the right is some flooding that happened a couple of years ago. I grew up in California. We just did not have the number of fires that my brothers and my family are experiencing. And, it's hard for them to get insurance. It does, to me, it sure seems like things are different now in California than they were when I was growing up. There's also a cost for life. These are the motor vehicle deaths and rates in the United States from 1913 to 2022. In 2022, we had 46,000 deaths per year. 26,000 deaths per year. The U.S. has 3 to 4 times the death rate per inhabitant as other peer countries via traffic and traffic casualties. 3 or 4 times, and these are modern countries. So it kind of begs the question: what are we doing differently? And this was from the FHWA. From 2010 to 2021, pedestrian deaths were up 72%, cyclist deaths up 55%. All fatalities were up 30%. So it kind of begs the question, if our transportation choices were a pill, would the FDA approve it? I have this little magic pill that allows you to live wherever you want and go to work wherever you want and go to the shows and all that, and it's only going to kill 45,000 people per year. It's kind of sobering, isn't it? So how is Madison responding? I think, if anyone knows how Madison is responding, it's this commission, right? We introduced Vision Zero 3 or 4 years ago, changed the paradigms. We're focusing on safety instead of relieving traffic congestion. We have a Safe Streets Madison program. We'll focus on speed reduction. The projects are allocated towards a high entry network. The new scoring metric provides a voice to all Madison neighborhoods. We have 103 completed projects, 71 more approved projects, but despite that, we still have over 600 project requests on our list. We have the complete green streets, which will provide access for all modes. I've been designing roads for almost 40 years. And it used to be that you figured out what you needed to accommodate your traffic demands. And then if there was space left over, you'd put on sidewalks, and bike lanes, right? They got what's left over. This new paradigm actually says that no, pedestrians, cyclists, and buses are our first priority. And then if there's room left over, then we allocate it towards motor vehicle travel and parking. This is an example of this. This commission helped approve this, right? This is Hammersley before. It's a street, beautiful street actually, without sidewalks. Had some bike lanes, but due to some speeds and volumes, many parents didn't feel like their kids felt safe riding on it. To the right, we were able to provide protected shared use path, preserve the majority of the trees, and still accommodate the motor vehicle. This is Seago Road. Retrofitting an existing 4-lane. You're able to provide a protected bike space, provide enough capacity for the motor vehicles, and a little bit of motor vehicle parking as well. The transit network redesign, we implemented that in 2023. And the benefits, the routes are more frequent, ridership's increasing, weekend and evening service is considerably better. Challenges, riders have to walk a little farther. And for someone like me, that's not so hard. I can walk to them, but other transit riders in the city, it is harder. And we just need to acknowledge that. This is one thing that will be in the operations report. We have been able to increase the number of people that are near a high frequency bus network. In 2018, you can see that in orange. That was our high frequency bus network in orange. In blue is our high frequency bus network now. So we've basically doubled the population served, probably increased the households in poverty by 50%, 2.5 times the people of color, those with a disability 3 times. So there are some benefits to that redesign.
Tom, we have a question from Lynn. Would you mind stopping?
Sure. Yeah.
Is the number of disability based on the fares that they pay? Is that how you determine that number?
No, it's the people within the ridership shed of the stops. So
Okay.
if you look at those stops, those are the stops.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's the number of people that are within the ridership area of those stops.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't, some people say, well, could you give us the number of people of color that are using the bus or the people of low income, and really we don't code those type of demographic characteristics on a bus pass. It's that would be pretty inappropriate because we don't want to. A bus pass is a bus pass, and you get that no matter who you are and what you do. We do have every couple of years week with the MPO do an onboard survey that helps give us some of that information. Many people will perhaps complain about our empty buses. I saw another empty bus, but our bus ridership is 25 riders per revenue hour. So that's pretty good. So that means that some hours we have maybe 150 riders, but that also means that some hours we might have five riders, right? But a person that goes to work at 9 a.m. has to be assured, when that's a high ridership time period, has to be assured that they can get home at 7 p.m, which might be a low ridership. So we view our service as providing transportation throughout the day when people need it. If we look at our statistics for Metro Transit, of the 852 directly operated bus systems in America, Metro Transit is in the top 6% in passengers for revenue hour. the best 10% in cost per passenger, and top 5% in the number of passengers served. So I want to just say, we in the transportation and metro departments, we need to strive to do better, but on a national scale, we're doing pretty good. So we compare favorably, and we're going to seek to do even more. We were able to launch Bus Rapid Transit this fall. This is a video. It reaches 95,000 residents, 100,000 jobs. The ridership in the November to December time period, when we compared November, December of 23 to November, December of 24, the system is up about 10%, and Route A, which is the BRT route, is up about 20%. It's more challenging for us to compare the September, October time period because we were in the midst of changing our fares, fare technology. We are still pursuing the North-South Bus Rapid Transit. That will provide access to 97,000 jobs, or 97,000 people, 78,000 jobs. Over half are lower income families, 42% people of color, 20% car-free households, 8% seniors, 8% people with disabilities. This is what we would like to develop on Park Street, where we have the bus lanes in the center, the reconstructed street, side path, similar to what we put on Mineral Point Road. So if if your child wants to go to the library, the Goodman Library there, they have a safe way to do it. Some of this will depend on our funding levels. We have a little bit of a shortfall still. I want to make note that while we've been talking about Safe Streets and Vision Zero and all these other initiatives, our parking division has also had a lot of things going on. It's probably been the most significant decade since the 1960s. The last 7 years, 3 parking garages have been built, 1,700 spaces. They were instrumental in helping pass and then run the transportation demand management ordinance. And then they also integrated the parking enforcement officers. It just kind of took a whole division inside of the police department and then moved them inside of the parking division. So with that, and I can take questions now.
Questions for Tom? That really puts it in perspective, Tom. Where we've been and where we're headed. Comments or questions for Tom? Okay.
Tom, that was a beautiful presentation.
Yeah.
That was really nicely done. Thank you.
It's
Thanks. Thanks, Lynn. Harold, go ahead.
Yes, wanted to say the same thing. Thanks for putting together. Might be worth thinking about which other city bodies this could be shared with. I wonder if the Board of Public Works would be an appropriate audience. And we have a recording, we have the slides, helps putting things into context, and they do more than just transportation, but yeah.
Thanks, Harold. Phil, go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. Tom, when I previewed your presentation last night and I looked at it, and I thought about my career when I started in 1970 with Federal Highway. And, you're absolutely right. And much of the mentality of the agency at that time, 1970, was we're going to build ourselves out of congestion. And that there were a lot of engineers that I learned from that thought that way. And then, I think the last maybe 15 years that I have changed my own philosophy 180 degrees. And, so it really, I really got a lot out of it. I really did. And it put it into perspective of, looking at those pictures from the late 60s in Madison, it was, with the amount of traffic and its growth, Madison would be an unlivable city if we still had those conditions today without the changes that we're making. So thanks. It's great. I want to talk to you offline about other alternatives for you making presentation to other groups. So thanks.
This is popular, Tom. You're going to be on the road.
Yeah, it's a fun one to give. I've given it about 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. Other comments or questions? I started working on the Capitol Square in 1974. So, yep, lots of changes, lots of changes since that time, and been involved in parking. Parking, Tom, was one of those big hot topics like you were talking about. So things have certainly changed. No question about it. Other comments or questions? And if you have any requests for Tom to make the same presentation to other bodies, Tom, I assume they can just send you an email directly?
For about another 9 weeks.
Okay. Other comments or questions for Tom? Thank you so much, Tom. It's not only enjoyable and informative, but pretty amazing to see the history and where we've come. And that first bus, how tiny it was, is pretty unbelievable compared to the articulated buses we have today on the BRT. So any last comments or questions for Tom? And thanks so much for spending the time putting that together. I know the Common Council found it very informative, and I know we did as well. And it sounds like it's popular enough that people might be interested in you presenting it elsewhere. So leverage the time that you spent on it, and thanks so much for doing that. Okay. Next, we have crossover reports from other BCCs. Does anybody have any reports for us this evening? Okay, I'm seeing no hands. All right. In terms of announcements, just a reminder that 2 people who've been an integral part of our Transportation Commission staff will be retiring. One of them being Tom in April, and one being Renee Calloway in March. So we're working on some resolutions honoring and thanking them. So we'll look forward to hearing people's thoughts when those come before us. So that was really all I had for announcements. And then lastly, future agenda items. We have at least 1 referral from the Common Council, possibly 2 more, depending on where folks are with those, with some ordinance changes. Complete Green Streets Guide. We're thinking we'll be ready for the March 5th TC meeting, and West Washington and Southwest Path will likely come back again. And as Chris said, the Transportation Improvement Program projects and programs, either March 5th or the following meeting. And we're tracking a number of items that TC members have suggested, and we talk about those at our TC agenda meetings as well. Does anybody have any other suggestions for future agenda items that we don't already have on the list? Okay, seeing no hands, we need a motion to adjourn. Bill?
Make a motion for adjournment.
And Harold?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. I have not yet had anybody ever object to adjourning. So thanks, everybody. Great meeting, great discussion, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.